Ngozi was rich, more wealthy than anyone in the village, and beautiful like the morning sun. But this village had a strange problem. For 20 years no one had given birth to a baby boy. Every time a child was born, it was always a girl. The king of the village was very old. He was on his deathbed and his hands shook when he walked. The people knew he couldn't be king for much longer. They needed a new king. But there was a big problem. No boys had been born for years, only girls. The village priest was a man with wisdom as deep as the ocean. He gathered the villagers together. He told them, "The first woman to give birth to a baby boy will have her son crowned as the new king." The people were shocked. Could it really be true? A boy born in the village would become the next king? From that day on, every woman in the village wanted to have a baby boy. Everyone was desperate to give birth to a son who would wear the crown. They prayed, they hoped, and some even cried to the gods. But still, only baby girls were born. The village was filled with the sound of newborn girls crying, but there was no sound of a baby boy's cry anywhere. Ngozi, sitting in her grand house, watched as the women of the village struggled to have a son. She smiled to herself, thinking, "I must be the one to give birth to the next king." The village waited and waited, but no boys came. And so the race for a baby boy began, and the village held its breath, wondering who would be the one to finally give them a new king. Ngozi wasn't just rich, she was also the neatest woman in the whole village. Her house shone like the morning dew on leaves, her pots and plates sparkled like stars in the night. Every corner of her house was spotless. People said, "Ngozi's house is so clean, even the wind won't leave dust behind." Ngozi had many maids who worked for her. They cleaned, cooked, and fetched water from the mountains for her. Ngozi didn't drink from the village stream like everyone else. She always sent her maids to climb the high mountain and fetch the cleanest water. "Make sure your hands are clean before touching my water pot," she would say to her maids. Not that the village's stream water was dirty, no, but Ngozi didn't just drink from it, and the reason was best known to her. Her maids obeyed because everyone knew how strict Ngozi was about neatness. But little did they know that Ngozi held a big and dangerous secret about the village stream that not even the Dibia knew about. However, people in the village admired her, but they also feared her. She was beautiful and wealthy, yes, but there was something about her that made people whisper when she wasn't looking. "Ngozi is proud," they would say. "She thinks she is better than all of us." But Ngozi didn't care. She walked with her head held high, her clothes always shining brighter than the sun. Yet for all her riches and neatness, Ngozi had one big problem that weighed on her heart like a heavy stone. She could not have a baby boy. Every time she tried to have a child, it was always a girl. And no matter how many men she slept, Ngozi could not solve this problem. Her wealth couldn't help her, her beauty couldn't help her. And as the days went by, Ngozi became more and more desperate. She would go to nearby villages in disguise to be with their men. She wanted a son, a boy who would one day become the king, and she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But the harder she tried, the more disappointed she became. Every time she thought she was pregnant with a boy, it turned out to be a girl. And Ngozi, with all her pride, began to feel a storm brewing in her heart. The race to have a baby boy was on, and Ngozi wasn't going to lose, no matter what. Her desire to be the mother of the future king grew stronger with each passing day. The thought of her son wearing the crown and ruling the village filled her dreams. She was determined, no, desperate, to give birth to a boy. And when Ngozi wanted something, she would stop at nothing to get it. Ngozi began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't picking the right man. So she decided to get intimate with more men, thinking one of them would surely give her the son she longed for. It wasn't long before she started stealing husbands from the women in the village. When Ngozi heard that a woman was pregnant, she would snatch the woman's husband, offering him gifts and money until he left his wife for her. The women couldn't fight back. Ngozi was too powerful, too rich, and with their husbands gone, these women were left with nothing but tears. Ngozi, on the other hand, felt no guilt. She was focused on one thing, having a baby boy who would be king. She slept with everyone, man after the other, each time hoping for a son. But every time she became pregnant, she would visit the dibia. The dibia would look into his cowrie shells, nod his head and say, "Ngozi, it is a girl." Her heart would sink like a stone in deep water. A girl again. She didn't want girls, she wanted a boy. And each time the dibia said it was a girl, Ngozi would end the pregnancy. She couldn't bear to give birth to a girl when she wanted a boy so badly. From the day it had been announced that the next male child of the village would become the future king, Ngozi's heart had started growing darker, and her desperation turned into a deep, restless storm inside her. She would not stop. She could not stop. She believed that one day she would give birth to a boy, and that boy would wear the crown of the village. But how long could this go on before everything fell apart? Ngozi's obsession with having a son burned deeper with each passing day. She couldn't bear the thought of another woman giving birth to a boy before her. Her desperation pushed her into seeking darker solutions. She needed to be the only one to bear the future king. One night, she visited a powerful dark sorcerer who lived far in the thick forest. His face was old and wrinkled like an ancient tree, and his voice was as rough as the wind through dry leaves. "What do you want, Ngozi?" he asked, though he already knew. "I want to be the only woman in this village to give birth to a boy," Ngozi said, her eyes burning with greed. "No other woman must have a son before me." The sorcerer thought for a moment, then smiled a dark, twisted smile. "I will give you what you want, but it comes with a price," he said. He handed her a small black charm. "This charm will make sure no woman in the village will give birth to a son as long as they drink from the village stream. They will only have daughters, but you must do something first." Ngozi's heart raced. She was ready for anything. "What must I do?" she asked. The sorcerer leaned in closer, his voice low. "Every night you must go to the village river and bathe openly under the moon. Let everyone see you, for it will make the charm stronger. Only after you've bathed will you drop the charm into the river, letting no one notice you. Then the curse will take effect." He paused for a while, then said, "Above all, you must not drink from that river once you start. If you do, the consequences are beyond what my mouth could say." Ngozi was shocked. Bathing openly in the river in front of everyone? But her desire to have a son was stronger than her pride. She nodded, taking the charm with her. That night, as the moon shone bright, Ngozi walked to the village river. The water glistened under the silver light, and the village was quiet, but some curious eyes were still awake. The villagers whispered as they watched Ngozi, the richest woman, walk to the river and begin to bathe openly. She washed herself in the cool water, her heart beating fast. The villagers watched in silence, confused by what they were seeing. Ngozi, who was always neat and private, was now bathing for all to see, but no one dared ask her why. After bathing, Ngozi carefully took the charm and dropped it into the water. The charm sank, disappearing into the depths of the river, and with it, the curse began. From that night on, no woman in the village would be able to give birth to a son. Only Ngozi could break the curse, when she was ready. She felt powerful. She believed she had finally won. As she walked away from the river, dripping with water and pride, she smiled to herself. "Now only I will give birth to a boy," she thought. But little did she know her actions would have consequences far beyond her control. After years of heartache and disappointment, Ngozi finally became pregnant again. As always, she visited the dibia to find out the gender of the baby. The dibia looked at his cowrie shells, then shook his head. "It's a girl," he said softly. Her heart sank. She had heard those words too many times, but this time something inside her told her not to end the pregnancy. She decided, "I will keep this child, no matter what." Weeks turned into months, and Ngozi prepared herself for the arrival of another daughter. Then, on a quiet night, the time came. The moon hung high in the sky, and the stars twinkled like diamonds. Ngozi's cries echoed through the village as she gave birth. But when the baby was placed in her arms, she gasped. It wasn't a girl. It was a boy. a strong, healthy boy. Her heart raced with joy and disbelief. The thing she had wanted for so long had finally happened. Tears of happiness filled her eyes. "My son," she whispered, holding the baby close to her chest. "You will be king, you will wear the crown, the village will bow before us." Ngozi imagined her future filled with power and riches beyond her wildest dreams. She saw herself ruling the village with her son by her side. Everything she had done, all the sacrifices she had made, had finally paid off. She believed that nothing could stop her now. But that same night, something strange happened in the village, something Ngozi could never have predicted. While she was still celebrating the birth of her son, her maid Amara also gave birth. And to everyone's shock, Amara gave birth to a boy too. When Ngozi heard the news, her joy turned to fury. How is this possible, she thought. No one else should be able to have a son. She had bathed openly at the river every night. She had cursed the village's water. No other woman was supposed to give birth to a boy, yet her own maid had done just that. Ngozi's heart filled with anger and jealousy. She knew that Amara's baby could threaten her son's chance to become king. If the village found out about Amara's son, they might choose him instead. She couldn't allow that to happen. In her rage, Ngozi made a terrible decision. She decided to get rid of Amara and her baby before anyone in the village found out. She would stop at nothing to protect her dreams of power. Her heart burned with jealousy and fear. She knew she had to act fast before the village discovered that Amara had also given birth to a boy. Late that night, when the village was asleep, she called for 3 of her strongest and most loyal men. Their faces were hard like stone, and their hands were skilled in dangerous tasks. "I need you to take care of something for me," Ngozi said coldly. "Go to Amara's hut, end her life, and take the baby. Make sure no one finds out." The men nodded without question. They took their weapons, sharp blades, and a large sack, and set out under the cover of darkness. The night was still, with only the sounds of crickets and the whispering wind. They moved like shadows through the village, unseen by anyone. When they reached Amara's small hut, they could hear the soft cries of the newborn baby inside. They crept closer, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. But just as they were about to strike, something unexpected happened. Chidi, the strongest of the 3 men, stepped forward to lead the attack. But as he looked down at the baby, his heart froze. He recognized the child. The boy was his own son. Memories flashed through his mind. His secret moments with Amara, their love hidden from the eyes of the village. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill his own child. "No," Chidi whispered, stepping back. The other 2 men looked at him in confusion. "We have to follow orders," one of them hissed, raising his blade. But Chidi, filled with the sudden strength of a father's love, turned on them. In a fierce struggle, he fought off the other 2 men. Blades clashed, and the quiet night was broken by the sound of their battle. Chidi overpowered them, knocking them to the ground. One of the men lay still, defeated, but the other crawled away, injured, leaving a trail of blood behind him as he fled back to Ngozi. Breathing heavily, Chidi turned to Amara, who was shaking with fear. "We have to leave," he said urgently. He gathered her and the baby in his arms and led them away from the hut, heading for the far edge of the village. They would find safety there until morning, and then they could announce the birth of their son to the Dibia and the village. But Chidi knew Ngozi wouldn't give up so easily. The battle was far from over. His plan was to reveal the truth before Ngozi could act again. Amara, still trembling, held her baby tightly to her chest. "What if they find us?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "They won't," Chidi replied firmly, though he wasn't sure himself. "We'll stay hidden until the morning, then everyone will know about our son, and no one will be able to harm us." Meanwhile, back at Ngozi's house, the injured man crawled through the door, his clothes stained with blood. He groaned, band-aid on his bloodied head, dragging himself across the floor until she stood over him, her eyes flashing with anger. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice cold. The man, weak and barely able to speak, gasped out, "Chidi, he betrayed us. He saved the woman and her baby. I couldn't stop him." Her face twisted with rage. She had been so close to getting rid of Amara and her baby. Now everything was at risk. If the village found out about the baby boy, all her plans would crumble like dry leaves in the wind. Furious, Ngozi wasted no time. She called for more of her men, stronger and more ruthless than the first. "Go after them," she ordered. "Find them before dawn, and this time, make sure they don't escape." The men, with grim faces and sharp weapons, set off into the night. They knew the tiniest routes and the darkest paths through the forest. Ngozi had given them strict orders. No mercy, no mistakes. As the earliest hours of the morning crept closer, Chidi and Amara stayed hidden in the shadows at the edge of the village, unaware that more danger was coming. He held her close, whispering words of comfort. But his mind was restless. He knew Ngozi would not give up so easily. The sound of footsteps in the distance sent a chill down Chidi's spine. He gripped his blade, ready to defend his family. The men were coming, and they would not stop until the job was done. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, Chidi and Amara knew it was time. They couldn't wait any longer. Holding her baby close, Amara followed him as they carefully made their way back toward the village. The plan was simple. Reach the dibia and announce the birth of their son before Ngozi could strike again. The village needed to know the truth. The more Chidi walked ahead, his eyes scanning the path for any sign of danger. But just as they approached the narrow route leading to the village, a sudden rustle in the bushes made him stop. Out of nowhere, Ngozi's men jumped out, blocking their way. They were armed with sharp weapons, their faces hard and filled with determination. They had one job: finish what they started. Chidi knew what had to be done. He turned to Amara, his voice urgent. "Run, Amara, run to the dibia. Tell him about our son. Tell the whole village." His eyes were fierce, but there was love and sadness in them too. Amara's heart pounded as she looked at him. "But what about you?" she asked, tears filling her eyes. "There's no time," Chidi replied. "Go now, I will hold them off." Without another word, Amara turned and ran as fast as her legs could carry her, clutching her baby to her chest. She could hear the sounds of fighting behind her, Chidi battling with all his strength to keep the men away. But deep down, she knew what was happening. Chidi fought bravely, swinging his blade, blocking and attacking, but he was outnumbered. The men overpowered him, and after a fierce struggle they struck him down. Chidi, the man who had saved Amara and their son, fell to the ground, his life slipping away. But his sacrifice was not in vain. Amara, with tears streaming down her face, ran faster than she had ever run before. She could hear the footsteps of Ngozi's men behind her, chasing her. But she didn't stop. Her baby's cries echoed in her ears, pushing her to keep going. Finally, the villagers had just begun their day, unaware of the danger that lurked. Amara's voice broke through the morning calm. "Help, help me," she cried out. "I gave birth to a baby boy." The villagers turned toward her, their eyes wide with shock. The curse had been broken. The whole village rushed toward her, but Amara knew she wasn't safe yet. Ngozi's men were still coming. Panting and trembling, Amara stumbled into the village square, her baby boy held tightly against her chest. The dibia, along with several villagers, turned their heads in surprise. They could see the panic in her eyes, and the baby's soft cries filled the air. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I gave birth to a baby boy." Her words echoed through the village like thunder. The villagers gasped. A baby boy? Could it be true? After all these years, had the curse finally been broken? Whispers spread like wildfire. The dibia, an old man with deep wisdom, stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise. "Show me the child," he said gently. She uncovered her baby's face, revealing the tiny precious boy. Two men, covered in blood and holding sharp weapons, stumbled into the square. They were the same men who had been sent by Ngozi, and they had come to finish the job after taking the life of Chidi. The villagers froze in fear, but before the men could act, a group of strong young villagers quickly overpowered them. They tied the men's hands and feet with ropes, binding them tightly. The men struggled, but they were no match for the angry villagers. The crowd, still buzzing with excitement, now stood in confusion and fear. Who were these men, and why had they come with weapons? The dibia, his face stern, stepped forward. Who sent you? Speak now, he commanded. The two men exchanged nervous glances, but they could no longer hide the truth. Fear filled their hearts as they prepared to reveal everything. Tied up and terrified, the two men knew there was no escape. Their eyes darted around the crowd, and they could feel the weight of the villagers' stares. The dibia's voice thundered again. Who sent you? One of the men, shaking, spoke first. It was Nosy, he stammered. She sent us to kill Amara and her baby. Gasps filled the air as the villagers turned to each other in shock. Nosy, the rich woman, the one who always seemed so neat and proper, how could she do such a terrible thing? The second man, his voice trembling, added. She feared that Amara's baby boy would take the place of her son as the future king. She didn't want anyone else to have a boy, so she ordered us to kill them. The villagers were stunned, their hearts sinking as the truth settled in. Ngozi, the woman they had admired for her wealth and neatness, had plotted such wickedness. The dibia's face grew dark with anger. Bring Ngozi here, he ordered. A group of villagers rushed to her grand house and dragged her to the square. When she arrived with her baby and saw Amara holding her own baby boy, her heart sank. She knew that her plans had fallen apart. The crowd murmured, and as Ngozi stood there, her head held low, she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Her dream of ruling the village was slipping away like sand through her fingers. The dibia stepped forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. Is this true, Nosy? Did you send these men to kill Amara and her child? She, knowing there was no way out, looked around at the faces of the villagers. She saw their anger, their shock, their disbelief. She took a deep breath and confessed, Yes, it's true. I sent them. The village was silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging in the air. The villagers could hardly believe that the woman they thought was so clean and perfect had plotted such evil. Her head hung low, for she knew that there was no escape this time. Ngozi, knowing she could not escape her fate, knelt down in the middle of the village square, her voice shaking as she made her full confession. I cursed the village's water, she said. The villagers gasped, their shock quickly turning to anger. I wanted all the power for myself. I wanted to be the only one to have a son who could become king. The crowd murmured in disbelief. She had cursed them all, making sure that no other woman could give birth to a boy. For years, they had been drinking from the village stream, never knowing it was cursed by her wickedness. Amara stepped forward, holding her baby tightly. It makes sense now, she said softly. I noticed that Ngozi never drank from the village stream. She would send her maids to fetch water from the top of the highest mountain. Wanting to be like her, I started drinking her leftover water, just to be as neat and perfect as she was. The villagers were stunned. It was Ngozi's own carelessness that had allowed Amara to break the curse without even knowing it. By drinking the clean mountain water, Amara had been spared from the curse, and that was why she was able to give birth to a baby boy. The dibia, his face stern with anger, began to prepare the rituals to lift the curse from the village. He chanted ancient words, calling upon the spirits to cleanse the water and free the village from Ngozi's wicked spell. Smoke filled the air, and the ground trembled as the curse was lifted. When the rituals were complete, the dibia stood tall and declared, Amara's son is the new king, the spirits have chosen him. The villagers cheered, their hearts filled with joy and relief. The long years of suffering were finally over. But Ngozi's punishment was far from over. Her child was taken away from her, and the dibia turned to her, his voice cold. For your greed and wickedness, you will be punished. Your child will remain here and we will never tell him about you. For months, days she walked in the evil forest. She regretted everything, the curse, the jealousy, the adulteries and deaths around her. But it was too late. Her heart, once filled with pride, now ached with regret. On the third day, she met her unfortunate end when she was attacked by hyenas in the jungle. Ngozi, once the richest woman in the village, now dead in the forest, never to be seen again. Amara's son, named Obinna, meaning father's heart, or God's gift, was crowned the new king of the village. He grew up to be a wise and fair ruler, beloved by all. Under his reign, the village prospered, the people were happy and at peace, and the years of suffering were soon forgotten. But the tale of Ngozi was never forgotten. Her greed, jealousy, and wickedness became a story told to children for generations, a reminder of what happens when selfishness and greed take over the heart. Amara, once a humble maid, became the mother of the king. She was respected by all, and her bravery was remembered as a beacon of hope. Obinna ruled with wisdom, fairness, and kindness, always mindful of the lessons from his mother and the story of the village's past. And so, the village thrived under the rule of the Chosen One, and the people lived in peace, forever grateful for the bravery that had freed them from Ngozi's dark curse. The story of Ngozi and Amara became a legend, passed down from generation to generation, a warning and a lesson that echoed through the ages. Greed and selfishness will always be punished, but bravery and truth will always shine in the end.